I'll tell you a funny story. I remember going to my first board meeting at Patagonia, and I come in, I'm the new young product guy with a vision and an opportunity. The business was small, and so there was just a huge amount of opportunity ahead of us. And I remember saying, well, this is the size of the market. This is how big we could be. This is the opportunity ahead of us. And Yvonne just stopped me and just said, we don't really think that way here.
Yeah.
It's just like, what problem are you trying to solve for the user? Yeah. And I remember standing there going, that's a really profound statement from the founder of the business to ask you that question, and how unconventional to be addressed that way, right? Typically, an owner of a business would be all about what's the market share opportunity, how big is the TAM, all of those sorts of questions.
Mm-hmm.
What percentage do we have today? He's like, don't worry about all that. What kind of product are you going to make? Hi, I'm Tim Bantle. I'm the CEO of Eddie Bauer, and you're on Behind the Brand with Brian Elliott.
Everyone, welcome to another episode of the show. Tim, welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
I usually ask my guests, how did you get this job?
We'll jump right in. I mean, the short story is it's been a very organic process. I started in retail as a college student, and I've essentially worked at every level in the industry, from cleaning bathrooms and selling products in a specialty outdoor store to today being the CEO of a 100-year-old company.
That's cool. I mean, we sort of have that in common, at least in the beginning of my career. That was my path too. We talked off camera that you listened to the Viore piece and the On Running piece, so you know that I started kind of basically worked my way through college at Ralph Lauren at the retail level. Yeah. And so, where'd you grow up?
St. Louis, Missouri.
Okay. And so, where were you working? What were you doing?
Yeah, I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. Happened to grew up in a big family, and in my later teenage years, started to kind of migrate away from ball sports and into rock climbing. And essentially, a high school physics and math teacher taught me and a couple buddies how to rock climb, and we all grew our hair long and started traveling and rock climbing at every chance we had. And so, when I went on to university, I kind of like to jokingly say half of my friends went to the East Coast to go to Ivy League schools, and the other half went out west to climb and ski. Mm-hmm. I had a scholarship, so I stayed home in the Midwest and started basically spending all of my time traveling to either climb or ski or mountain bike. And I got a job at a specialty gear shop in the town I grew up in called the Alpine Shop. And that was just an incredible stepping stone. Essentially, I started learning the business from the inside out. And I worked there all through college, and that was sort of a springboard for me into the outdoor industry overall.
So what parts of the country were you going? What were some of these points of interest? Like, were you in Colorado, or were you...
Sure. If we wanted to ski or snowboard, we had to go to Colorado. But northern Arkansas has quite a lot of great rock climbing. So for us as novices early on in our climbing careers, we just drive down to the Ozark Mountains and climb in the northern part of the state.
Very cool. Yeah, and being from California, I think of Joshua Tree National Forest. I think of Yosemite.
Of course.
Have you ever been to Yosemite and seen El Cap? You come through that tunnel and you see sometimes you see the climbers.
Of course. Yeah.
I mean, it takes a lot of guts. I mean, that's an incredible sport.
It is. And it's a sport that really requires a tremendous amount of focus.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
And strength.
Of course.
And grit and courage. At what level did you get? I mean, were you like expert level and the big peaks? I guess an advanced intermediate level would be kind of where I topped out. Yeah, still legit though. I mean, it's pretty incredible.
I spent most of my 20s teaching high school students how to climb and ski. Worked for a wilderness school, kind of went through the National Outdoor Leadership School, which is essentially the school that was created to train outward bound instructors.
Oh, okay.
So I did that professionally for 5 years after college. Worked on a ranch in Wyoming, lived in a tent 150 days a year, those sorts of things.
Yeah. Now you're this executive at this major legacy brand, mm-hmm. and you can walk the talk.
Yeah, for sure.
You sort of know that outdoor lifestyle. You've lived it. You've breathed it. You've ate the dried food, whatever it takes to do that.
That's right.
Kind of outdoor camping.
Yes. I mean, I can tell you that I probably, early in my career as a young climber, I probably spent more on rock gear in a year than I earned in the store.
Wow.
Selling product.
And so where did you think you were going to end up on that path? I mean, were you going to maybe go into be a professional, or what was the path?
Like I said before, it was very organic. I had the good fortune of having a high school teacher who basically, I remember this class, it was essentially on your future and like how you imagine it. Mm-hmm. And the message that we got in that class was follow your passion and the money will follow, right?
Okay.
And I was naive enough to believe that was true. And
were your parents buying it though? I mean, like, come on, Tim, like, you've been climbing and like, when are you going to start the career? Were you getting that kind of pressure?
Well, I mean, I can still remember my dad. I went on to school to study philosophy, and my older sister,
very practical,
extremely
major.
Practical major. Yes. and my older sister who studied design, and we were the first two people in our family to go to college. And my dad was a small business owner, ran a small independent eyewear shop. And his first two kids of 6 go off to college, and one is studying art and the other is studying philosophy. And he's thinking to himself, what went wrong here?
Right.
Right. Yeah. And, 5 years later, after I graduated, maybe 10 years later, I remember having dinner with him, and he said, when people ask me, because I've had 6 kids, like what they should do in school or what they should pursue, I just tell them philosophy now. Because, it was sort of a standing joke, but the training in philosophy ended up really being just a training in thinking. And then that's pretty much universally applicable in business.
I would agree with that. Probably one of the most underrated skills ever is critical thinking, right? We get into this group think, or we don't think at all, or we just sort of go along as this cog in a machine.
Yeah.
Say more about that.
Well, I'd say that studying philosophy was actually a path into my first kind of big break in the industry, because I wrote my senior thesis on environmental ethics, and I really couldn't imagine working at a standard company with that background. I was like, what am I going to do with this? And I happened to be working in the shop. We were a big Patagonia retailer, and a job became available for sales for Patagonia in the Midwest. And I was lucky enough to get hired. And from there, kind of the next several steps in my career kind of unfolded. Yeah. But when you work for a mission-driven company like that one, the only way into the company is through the mission. And essentially having kind of grown up in the sports and then also having a pretty heavy commitment to environmentalism, those two things came together and they ended up in a cool sales job. Yeah.
So what signals were you getting at the time? Because, I think that there's signposts all around us. So there's multiple good options, right? Yeah. And I'm speaking to the people who are maybe looking for their path right now and trying to figure that out, whether they're a young person coming out of school or if they're mid-career, they've been a CPA their entire life and they're miserable. They want to do something more fulfilling to them if numbers is not doing it for them. So how did you know that that was it?
And when you say that was it, can you just...
Yeah, I mean, it seems like your career path was very, straight and narrow instead of jagged and and swirly.
Yeah, I have no vision of myself outside of our industry. Right, I grew up in this industry. I've been working almost 30 consecutive years just in the outdoor space. From retail sales associate to guide and educator to sales rep to product manager to general manager. Yeah. And I've had the opportunity to do that in the US and in Europe and in Canada and travel internationally for the roles that I've been in. And I just love the space. It's you get to sit at this incredible intersection of, I think of the type of work I do as largely being an anthropologist, because, if you work in product, you are essentially synthesizing what's going on in culture, weather, in my industry, right?
Right.
Sports, and you're doing that at a global level. And it just so happened to kind of coincide with the emergence of outdoor as a kind of a global phenomenon, right? It's not an accident. I mean, I remember reading this incredible book once that talked a little bit about some of the unique qualities of the United States, but it's not an accident that most of the global outdoor brands in the world came up on the American West Coast. They're kind of equidistant to London and to Tokyo from that location. And that look, the types of products that we've designed and developed over the years in the industry, they are now kind of global staples of people's wardrobes the same way that jeans are, right? Mm-hmm. A fleece, a down coat, a lightweight synthetic jacket,
a puffy vest.
A puffy vest. Yeah. They're literally wardrobe staples the same way that a pair of Levi's are, right? Mm-hmm. And that's unique because that's happened over the last 30 years by and large, and we're as enmeshed in culture as you could possibly be,
Yeah. And so where did that sales job take you then from there?
Well, it was a very unique time. Patagonia was a much smaller company then, and I happened to, because I was close to the sports, I was close to customers, and I had kind of a knack for product. That's kind of home base for me. I was invited to participate in the line formation process. And so, in terms of, business process, companies will kind of decide what they're going to make and then have a process of review. And I was asked to come out to Ventura. I actually flew into LAX the first time when I did that. Maybe 6 times a year to participate in the formation of the line.
Yeah, you're talking about the product line.
Yeah.
And everything that's going to be made for that year from, soup to nuts, everything.
Yeah. And I kind of from the cheap seats as a sales guy, I got to watch how that whole process worked and learn it and contribute. And it turns out I had a knack for it. And so I showed up at a sales meeting one day, and the head of the technical business unit had been fired that morning. And the VP comes over to me and he says, "Hey, I've got a problem." And I said, "Okay, what is it?" And he said, "I just fired the head of the business unit, technical business unit. Would you mind presenting to the company?"
Oh, yeah, no pressure.
Yeah, no pressure. And I said, "Can somebody get me a cup of coffee, a workbook so I can learn all the color names?"
Yeah.
We've been out with the sales team drinking all night.
Yeah.
And so they, got the workbook, went up, presented to, say, 400 colleagues from around the world. And what I didn't realize is it was kind of an audition for a job. And after that, they said, "Hey, would you be interested in coming out and taking on this role after the sales season?" And
wow.
so it was an incredible segue into working in product management.
Very slick. I mean,
It was
trying you out on the job like that. So let's unpack that a little bit. First of all, put a timestamp. How old were you at the time?
Gosh, I was in my late 20s.
Okay. So maybe you're 27, 28.
Yeah.
Big opportunity you stepped right into on accident, unexpected. But at the same time, you could argue that you were sort of training for that by walking the talk, all whether you were out climbing or sleeping on a rock or, doing stuff on a small scale, a small little retail shop. That was preparing you. I get it. And about what year was that?
Well, I think I joined Patagonia in 2003, 2004, somewhere in that zone. I think 2003.
So 2003, the year after a little website called YouTube launches.
Right.
We're just starting like the digital revolution. That same year, this little kid, a young kid named Mark Zuckerberg, starts a website at Harvard. YouTube sells to Google the year after, 2005. Things start to happen. The first iPhone comes out a couple of years later. And this is like, a lot of things are happening at this time in the world.
For sure.
A lot of cool things. Access to information. And so how did that affect or help with what you were doing? I want to kind of hear this process of putting together a product line. What does that entail?
Yeah. It's amazing because they don't tell you that this is the sort of job you can get when you're in school. And then you get out in the world and you discover, you go to your first sales meeting, you're like, hey, that person's job is to decide what the company makes and then see it through from concept all the way out to the marketplace. Yeah. And I'd say it's probably the most fun job in a business, in an apparel or footwear or equipment business. And it really, it typically starts with, hey, we have a certain business today, right? Whatever that thing is. And then you're constantly trying to see the future, right? And trying to figure out where to take the business you have to achieve the outcome that you want. And so that process gets memorialized in a sort of what's often referred to as a line review process or and a go-to-market process.
I mean, is it as simple as, hey guys, we're selling the heck out of this puffy vest. Mm-hmm. And that's going to be like the anchor in this line. And let's build off of that. Like, so what complements that puffy vest, or like, what do we wear, on our feet, on the legs? Is it like ground up?
Sure. There is an outfitting thing. And I'd say most brands today, they want to be everything. They want to be in every category because they want to be clothing brands. Yeah. They, a lot of outdoor brands in particular, they try to be in a lot of categories, especially the big ones. But brands are largely famous for a few things, right? And so, each company kind of has its own forte. Mm-hmm. We were just lucky enough during that time to create a bunch of new categories, essentially new businesses.
Yeah. Well, at the time, I think it was probably the Patagonia jacket, right? I mean, that
one, the nanopuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. I remember trademarking that.
Okay.
Yeah. I'll tell you a funny story. I remember going to my first board meeting at Patagonia, and I come in, I'm the new young product guy with a a vision and an opportunity. The business was small, and so there was just a huge amount of opportunity ahead of us. And I remember saying, well, this is the size of the market. This is how big we could be. This is the opportunity ahead of us. And Yvonne just stopped me and just said, we don't really think that way here.
Yeah.
It's just like, what problem are you trying to solve for the user? Yeah. And I remember standing there going, that's a really profound statement from the founder of the business to ask you that question, and how unconventional to be addressed that way, right? Typically, an owner of a business would be all about what's the market share opportunity, how big is the TAM, all of those sorts of questions. What percentage do we have today? He's like, don't worry about all that. What kind of product are you going to make? And at the time, fleece had become a wardrobe staple, and everybody had a fleece jacket and maybe a Gore-Tex jacket. And, we were all sitting around scratching our head going, what's the next fleece? How do we evolve this category? And the reality of the fleece business is that fleece today, the knitting machines that fleece is made on have been around for 100 years. And so there are certain limitations you can make in terms of what the output of a given knitting machine can be. Yeah. And, fleece, if you look at it, it's light and warm, but it's also bulky. And so we were trying to figure out how to fix the fleece business. Mm-hmm. And this is one of the beauties of working with very talented designers. Because, if we step back for a second, we were trying to solve a problem for a user, which is how you keep them warm and dry and provide them with a really versatile product.
Yeah, maybe lightweight to stick in their backpack.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of our designers showed up and he said, listen, I don't have a solution to that fleece problem, but I made this really cool ultralight down prototype, which is, at the time, was really revolutionary. And
100%.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would just underscore that and co-sign that, because I remember even being on the ski slopes and having this huge, bulky, heavy down, goose filled, whatever. But it was like so bulky and,
for sure.
It was like you had to have a separate carry-on an airplane just to carry that jacket around.
Well, and I tell this story because it's so insightful. And this is why in the outdoor industry, all of the most famous products were designed by either product developers or industrial designers. Not by fashion designers. And because the process and the way that you approach thinking about product is very different. And in this case, our senior designer who was working on it said, hey, listen, the traditional down jacket has a 4-inch channel. Everybody knows the big, bulky 4-inch channel, classic down jacket. He said, I was just thinking about how do you make a down jacket lighter and thinner? And the answer is pretty simple. You reduce the width of the baffle so that you can put less down in it.
Smaller squares.
Smaller channels. And so he just cut the channel in half and filled it up. And lo and behold, the down jacket is now half as thick as it was before. And then we cut it in half again. And then we added a third. And we played with different, heights, if you will, of those channels. And they would give you different thicknesses and different aesthetics. And so that...
Super cool. I can just sort of imagine that evolving.
Yeah, it was a process of discovery. And it turned out that our fleece problem wasn't solved by another fleece. It was solved by a lightweight down jacket. Mm-hmm. And after we launched that product and built out a franchise around it, we said, all right, well, what would that look like as a synthetic fabric? Because synthetics, they're a little easier to care. They're a little bit less expensive. You can wear them in the rain. And that's what gave birth to the nanopuff.
Wow. And how quickly from like inception to completion did you end up trademarking that? And how soon did it get traction?
Immediately. One of the things in product is...
so functional.
Super functional and so out of the box. But what you find when you launch a winning product, which doesn't happen every day, right? I mean, there are lots of products that are launched that don't go anywhere, right? Yeah. Is you get immediate feedback like, this is really cool. And then your sales orders come in bigger than you planned. And then you start chasing inventory and then, you have something. And so in the case after we'd established the down sweater, because it had become so iconic and so useful, once people saw the nanopuff, it was just game on. People were just chasing it immediately.
How many people are on that team with you doing that? I'm just curious. Was that like a team of like 35 or is that like a team of 4 of you? Like just...
Yeah, it's more like a team of 4 than it is of 35.
Wow.
Yeah, it was, a lead designer, a product manager, a product developer, and a materials person. Yeah. It's kind of the core group.
And then what did Yvonne say?
Well, he loved it. And one of the beautiful things about Patagonia is because the first fleece, right, the snap tee pullover, right, which was, Yvonne didn't like extra buttons or snaps or zippers that were unnecessary. Every Patagonia product starts out in that silhouette. Mm-hmm. And so if you want to know how to build a Patagonia product in a new materialization, you simply take that incredible new materialization and you put it in the original silhouette as the starting point. Mm-hmm. And then from there you expand.
Yeah. Wow. How cool. How cool. I mean, there's some great lessons there. One is not to discount this experimentation. I mean, you were going down this path to create fleece or a solution for fleece. You ended up with the nanopuff, which was totally unintended, but it's like you couldn't have got there unless you headed down a certain path,
Right.
and had a certain amount of failure or willingness to fail baked into that process, which I think is a, overarching metaphor that can be applied to just about anything.
Sure.
So many of us are caught up in getting it right out of the gate, or even not even at the gate. You're sort of thinking about it and you're waiting and just articulating so that you don't make mistakes. But it's like the only way to learn, grow, get smarter, you have to be willing to make those mistakes.
Sure.
Fail fast, correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. We were extremely lucky in that case to just essentially find a concept that worked. And then the iteration really came in silhouettes after that. You had a jacket, you had a vest, you had a hoodie, you make a hybrid version with fleece panels, and you build a family of products around it over time.
Okay. And so how long do you stay at Patagonia?
Gosh, I think I was there 7 or 8 years.
Okay. Yeah. So you did some damage.
Yeah.
You contributed, like,
yeah.
So if that's
I grew up
2003.
I grew up in the brand, right? I was there until 2010, 2011.
Yeah. We all sort of did.
Yeah.
If you lived outside and you didn't want to be cold or wet,
Yeah.
you probably knew the Patagonia name. It's almost unavoidable in outdoor sports. And so then what'd you do? How'd you pivot? That's just like maybe 2010, 2011.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you in advance, I never had a career plan. I was sort of just focused on what's right in front of me.
Yeah.
And good things just seemed to flow from that. In this case, though, it's a little bit of a wrinkle. I mean, I think I can honestly say that if the next turn of events hadn't occurred, my wife and I, we met at Patagonia, we'd probably still be working there. And I was just, mentioning before I came in, I flew into LA this morning for this chat, but I met my wife in the baggage claim at LAX. And I had this moment this morning where we were meeting there for a sales meeting. We both showed up at the same time. We're on the same bus to go to campus.
How cool.
And gosh, I walked out and it just hit me. I was like, oh my gosh, I met Sarah right there, like almost 15 years ago.
That is awesome.
And so I had this kind of this walk down memory lane this morning flying into LAX. But Yvon started a company before Patagonia called Schnard Equipment. And Schnard Equipment, he founded in his parents' backyard with a hammer and an anvil and like a small loan from his dad. And he started making rock gear. And he ran that business from, the early 50s to the 80s. And when he turned it over to a guy named Peter Metcalf. And Peter was the first general manager after Yvon for Schnard Equipment. And in the late 80s, kind of right on the edge of the early 90s, the Schnards put the business through bankruptcy to kind of protect Patagonia from liability lawsuits that were happening at the time in the climbing space. And so Peter rallied together investors and friends and retailers and distributors, and they bought the business out of bankruptcy, and they founded Black Diamond Equipment.
Oh, that's cool. I didn't know that story.
Yeah, and so Black Diamond had just gone public, and Sarah and I just had our first son. And believe it or not, you asked me if I'd been in Yosemite. We were in Yosemite on our last trip as a couple before we went home for the last trimester for her to have what would be our first son, Hunter. And she woke me up in the middle of the night in the tent and was like, hey, I think my water just broke. And I was supposed to go climbing in the morning.
Okay.
And I said, oh my God, we better go. So we drove through the night to Fresno.
Yeah.
And my son Hunter was born, like 4 days later, with some really intense special needs.
Wow.
And we learned basically over the course of the next month or two, being in the hospital, that her career was over and she was going to be home with Hunter full time.
Gotcha.
And when I got back to work, it became clear somewhat quickly that living on one income in Southern California, several hours from a large children's hospital, was going to be a challenge. And Peter happened to pick up the phone and call me and said, hey, we've just gone public. We're looking for someone to come and start up our apparel division. I'm looking for someone to take over leadership of the brand when I exit later. And I actually don't think there was any other company at the time that I would have been interested in leaving Patagonia to join, but this was like directly in the legacy of the brand. It had been founded by Yvon. It had been carried on by Peter.
It was kind of in the family.
Totally. I mean, the companies would do photo shoots together, right? For rock climbing gear and the apparel at the time. So,
and I would guess that Yvon will probably just champion you and applaud you out the door, like, go son, like,
yeah. Yeah, there was a little stress around that, just because we had such an amazing run.
Yeah.
And I was going to start an apparel division for another company, but we remained close with a lot of friends and folks from Patagonia. So off I went to essentially do a startup inside an existing brand, and that was my first experience of general management and sort of learning, working for a CEO, newly public company, starting up an apparel division from zero.
Yeah. Let's stay on Yvonne for a second too. What are some of those lessons that you've taken now into your CEO role at Eddie Bauer?
Well, I mean, the first thing I'll say I'm super appreciative to Yvonne for is he always said he has an MBA. It's called Management by Absence. And his primary goal was to hire people that he believed in and then just let them do the job. And he intentionally didn't hire MBAs. And so somebody, probably at the time, the only place I could have got the kind of job I got as a philosophy major and a climber was at Patagonia.
Yeah, he's probably like, let me see the calluses.
Yeah. Touch your hands. Yeah, let's check this out. And so, that was just incredible because, I got a chance to kind of grow with that business in a really instrumental role and essentially learn by doing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just racking my brain trying to think. There aren't many leaders that you get to work under or with like Yvonne, you had.
Yeah.
I mean, maybe Steve Jobs and, there's a handful of others that are probably on that Mount Rushmore.
Literally.
Right?
A few more.
Yeah. And what an incredible opportunity. Learn at the feet of the master, really.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And Yvonne has an incredible way of distilling problems just to their essence, and that's why he's so successful, the same way Steve Jobs was. I feel super fortunate to have had the experience working there.
Incredible. Thank you for sharing that. I had no idea that was your background. And so then where did that take you? You were learning the ropes as an executive.
Yeah, essentially.
Management now.
I was management now, working for a CEO in a public company and, learned how intense working in a public company can be, especially for apparel, footwear, and equipment type businesses.
Talk about how important still that sort of sales experience is as the CEO. I mean, you're still in sales.
No doubt. I mean, working in sales was the most instructive thing in my career. It was the unlock. And people who maybe come out of school without, a STEM degree or a real sharp focus, and they say, how should I get a job in the industry? I'm just like, sales is an incredible entryway.
Yeah.
You get to learn the product, you get to learn the customer base, you learn the business from the inside out.
Well, and so many people, especially people that I meet who are creative, say, "Oh, I'm the artist. I'm not a salesperson."
Right.
And I'm like, wrong.
You will be eventually.
You have to. If you want to sell your art, or you want to sell your service, or you want to sell yourself to someone to work into an opportunity. We're all in sales.
Yeah.
And it's just an incredibly important skill to learn early, or just plan to work for someone else your entire life, punch in a clock, and be content with that. And that's fine for some people, but it's like, you got to learn how to sell. Yeah,
no doubt. I mean, I remember, Yvonne was a huge influence. The other influence at the time was Steve Jobs. I mean, I remember buying my first Mac computer and would literally watch every keynote address, right? Just because there was nothing more magical than the way that those pieces were put together between technology and humanity, design, and nobody really since has been able to tell that story in such a beautiful way.
Yeah, the ultimate marketer for sure.
No doubt.
Visionary on product design and all that as well. What advice do you have for people who are in the C-suite, C-level, or aspiring to be? Give us some, from your POV, advice on that level.
Oh gosh, I don't know that I have any generic advice to provide. I think it's most likely the case that every CEO job is extremely unique and specific to whatever situation that business is in.
Let me give you a specific. So there's, a lot of discussion about coming back to the office full time versus remote versus hybrid versus. So, how are you guys handling that at Eddie Bauer?
We're doing hybrid. Yeah. So we have associates in the office 3 days a week. And that tends to be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. And then people kind of flex the Mondays and Fridays.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I was actually speaking at the business school graduation ceremony for my university a couple weekends ago, and had a chance to do like a seminar with students, and they were asking for advice on what to do. And I was just like, just show up at the office. You know, you need to be there in order to learn and make the connections. You know, somebody asked me during that time, how did you wind up here? And I told them, I said, listen, you know, and this is maybe runs a little bit counter to the grain currently around how you do hiring, but every job I've had has been because a former boss recommended me for the job.
Right.
You know, when people are looking for candidates to start up an apparel division or to move to Europe and to, you know, do a restructuring, they get on the phone, they call people in their network and they go, hey, I'm looking for somebody to do X. Do you know anybody? And if you happen to be on their mind,
right,
they're going to say, hey, call Tim. And that happened. That's how I've gotten all of the jobs I've had.
Yeah, I would totally co-sign that. I mean, you show up at the office to do your work, but you show up because it's about relationships.
100%.
It's always been about relationships.
Yeah.
It always will be.
Yeah.
Like nothing has changed.
Yeah. You have to learn by doing. And if you're a product company, and in the case of our situation, a retailer, you can't do it from your bedroom. You've got to be together with your colleagues, working with product, working in the, you know, in the studio.
Yeah. That's when that opportunity comes knocking. If you're there to open the door, you got it. If you're at home working remotely, maybe not.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I love that. Let's shift gears a little bit. This show is called Behind the Brand. We talk about brands a lot. You've been talking about the legacy brand that you sort of came up from and learned from, Patagonia brand, another great brand. Now let's talk about Eddie Bauer a little bit. How would you define what a brand is? And then how would you explain the Eddie Bauer brand?
You know, I always say I'm very literal on the brand front. You know, when you're creating a brand, you're literally trying to sear an idea into the brain of the audience, right? And so, you know, in the very simplest sense, that's what a brand is. But ultimately, you know, those brands, they get filled with meaning and emotion and context over time. And you know, I've put together kind of a framework for thinking about brands for myself, and that I use in talking with employees and staff, and when I do, you know, activities like rebranding activities, as a framework to put the filter on what we're doing. And so, you know, I'd say there's a few different components I would put in place, and maybe even before you get to the brand, you need to think about the business, right? And what are you doing? You know, like you have to find some opportunity in the world, and a friend of mine introduced me to this idea, and I've tested all of the companies I've worked at against this very basic framework. But the idea is, you know, if you go to Harvard and you do case studies, you're going to end up, you know, focusing on, you know, how do you create sustainable competitive advantage with your business? And you can do it through brand, just pure brand identity and sort of brand love. You can do it through innovation. You can do it through value for the customer. And to some degree, I think, you know, all great companies come from one of those wellsprings of opportunity. I happen to have come up in some brands that were innovation first, right? Mm-hmm. Not all brands are, you know, like fashion brands are not innovation first, they're culture first, right? Right. But you can, once you have your idea for how you're going to create value in the world and create kind of a sustainable proposition, then you start working on kind of what the brand is next, right? And the brand itself, you know, we can talk a little bit about a few ways I like to think about that, but foundationally, the way I ask like our marketing teams to think about this is human beings mimic each other. And I mean this in a non-condescending way. I think the most normal thing that a human child and mother do is mirror each other, right? And people grow up sort of idolizing people they look up to and mirroring people in their environment. And so when you create a brand, ultimately what you're presenting to the world is something that you want people to mirror back, right? And so you have to have an idea of what that is. And, you know, we could, I'm sure that you have a basic brand building framework. Everyone has kind of put together a way of thinking through the elements that create a brand. I like to get really simple. You know, human beings are driven by story and narrative. And it, you know, I find very simple kind of archetypal architecture as a great way to start, right? Like when you walk, and let's just say in the case of through the mall, if you walk up to a store, do you have immediately a sense of the character of the store that you're going to walk into?
Hopefully you do.
Hopefully you do. Not always. And if you happen to walk up to a store that you don't have that feeling about, you'll know it. And if you happen to walk up to a store where you do have that feeling, you'll know it. And so, each of these brands in the outdoor space, they're all kind of explorers at the highest level. But if you were to zoom out, I don't know, there are 200 outdoor brands in the world, 300 outdoor brands in the world, something like that. I mean, we could sit here and fill the table up with just, all of the different outdoor brands in the space. And so you have to have kind of a secondary hook, if you will.
100%. I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, when I came to Eddie Bauer, I walked in and I didn't have a game plan. I just said,
And what year was this?
This was in 2022.
Okay.
So about 18 months ago.
Okay. 2 years ago, you step in, you get handed the reins.
Yeah.
Okay.
Tim, what should we do?
Yeah.
Right. And so I kind of start with this framework, like how do you think about the business you're in? How do you think about the central idea through this notion of mimesis, right?
Yeah.
Mimicry. And then what personality are you going to shape? What archetype are you going to shape around the brand persona? And, I've had a chance to work in maybe two of the other biggest brands in North America with the North Face and Patagonia. And so I just sat with the team and I said, listen, Patagonia, like its archetype is the sage. Like that business has always been about Yvonne bringing wisdom to the world through the product. It's been about the kind of ethics of climbing first and then kind of sustainability and environmentalism second,
right,
as the business evolved. If you go back and look at the first catalogs of the North Face, and the North Face was founded by one of Yvonne's friends, Doug Tompkins, right? But in 1966, that first North Face catalog is a singular guy standing on a spire with a rope. It's a hero brand, right? Mm-hmm. And everything about the North Face for the last 50 years has been about the hero, the athlete, and the way that's also been interpreted, over the last several years is also through kind of the lens of the artist, right? But it's sort of this kind of hero persona.
Yeah, and I think North Face, hardcore,
totally
Gore-Tex, extreme conditions.
Yeah.
Yeah. When I think of Patagonia, I think of, like you said, the sage, the one who paved the path,
mm-hmm.
And also the people's brand.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the sage, kind of withdraws from the world and then returns with some wisdom, right? And you can just watch Yvonne do that over and over and over again, while the hero is sort of omnipresent as a focal point for people.
Right.
And so I came into Eddie Bauer and I said, I don't have a game. I don't know what the solution is here. I don't even know what I'm up against. But luckily there's 100 years of archive there, including some incredible interviews with Eddie Bauer himself. And so as I started to learn about the business, it really is some kind of deep anthropology. I started to learn about, there's this guy, he was born on Orca Island in Puget Sound. And, when he was a teenager, he moved to Seattle with his mom. His parents broke up and he moved with his mom and he got a job at a sporting goods store in order to help pay the bills, as a teenager, and
strapper,
literally. And then essentially formed the Eddie Bauer brand out of that experience. And I was like, this is an everyman brand. This is a brand for everybody. Mm-hmm. And you look at the interviews with him in the early days, what were you trying to do? And he said, we didn't care who you were, if you were, someone with a really fancy title and a lot of money, or you came in off the reservation to shop for fly fishing gear. We treated you the same, and we wanted to make great product and give you really good customer service. And I was like, this is like the quintessential everyman outdoor brand mm-hmm. in America. And that's its opportunity to kind of dust that off and kind of, reinterpret and reimagine and kind of reintroduce that to another generation.
Yeah, I buy that. How did you, that's a tall order to come in and sort of reboot that brand. Did you feel like it needed rebooting? Because Eddie Bauer has not been top of mind for me.
Yeah.
Of course, neither has North Face or Patagonia, for that matter, being top of mind, because I live in California and I only pack it in my gear when I'm going someplace extreme.
Yeah.
But how'd you think about that opportunity where you're like, wow, this is going to be great. I get to sort of carve, new snow on the mountain, new path? Or was it like, I was curious about how did you view that opportunity? As like tall order or not? No, I got this, or like?
Oh, sure. To be candid, the brand had fallen off my radar as well. I hadn't been following it.
Yeah.
And so I had to reintroduce myself to the brand when I got the phone call, and kind of to pull some threads back together, because, you kind of, life and careers kind of have this interesting way of intertwining with one another. But we were living and working in Canada at the time, and we needed to get back to the US for my son to have some major surgery and get back in the US healthcare system when Eddie Bauer called. And I thought, well, let me take a look at this, because I know that sometime over the next year or two, we better get back into the States and get Hunter set up. And so I looked at the product line. The product line looked really good. I was really impressed with what was the content of the line looked like. The brand needed some refreshing, kind of some reconsideration. But the bones of the product architecture looked terrific. So, after the process of talking with the ownership team and coming on board, it was sort of like, let's get under the hood, let's see what's here, and then let's figure out how to take this thing forward. Yeah.
I would be thrilled, I think, at that opportunity. I mean, you can only sort of go up, right?
Right.
If the brand has sort of had a life cycle or two. And
sure.
I remember as a kid growing up in the 80s and 90s, I think Eddie Bauer did collabs like with Ford. I remember like a Ford Eddie Bauer edition.
I mean, I say that's the most important Eddie Bauer product that has been made in the modern era, right? I mean, we've got this 100-year-old business, but I'll remember my dad, who could not believe that anyone would need a SUV, right? In the 90s, was like, what is an SUV for? Nobody needs an SUV.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, he's got one, and it has an Eddie Bauer, logo on the back. And it literally was the introduction of the SUV for everyone, right? And that's why that particular product, I think, has such staying power in people's minds, is because it was on point.
Yeah. And I think it's sort of iconic as one of the really innovative integrations, because, Louis Vuitton has done their integrations since, I think, with like the Land Rover or whatever they're doing. But
of course,
Eddie Bauer really was the first to do that sort of cross, non-endemic collab. So that's cool. And we were talking off camera too. You got this collab going with this. Tell me more about the collabs and things that you're doing.
Oh, this is a piece from a brand in Montreal called Jound that we did a collab with, and this is a kind of an OG Eddie Bauer silhouette that they reinterpreted for the modern era. So it's just a nice, I woke up this morning, had to take a ferry ride to a cab to the airport, and it's just threw it on because it's easy to wear.
Yeah. So talk about how you're looking at collabs now and how you evaluate those opportunities, how you're finding these. I've never heard of that company. You said they're out of Canada. They're a small.
Yeah.
Who are they?
Yeah, they're a small streetwear brand in Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah. I managed collabs at the North Face. And so that was a really interesting experience to kind of see. I think we went through it very naturally through a massive boom in collabs. And I think everyone is now just kind of scratching their head and going, what's next in the world of collab? You might interpret what happened in collabs as also part of like a ZIRP era phenomenon, zero interest rate, sort of era phenomenon. But I think everyone is probably at home revisiting what collabs mean to them and how they're gonna use them going forward right now.
But how do you look at them? Like, how do you see them as opportunities? So why did you choose that small little streetwear brand in Montreal? Montreal's a very cool place.
Yeah.
But it's so niche and small and
right. Yeah.
Some of it's French speaking.
Yeah.
Right. Off the beaten path.
Yeah. I lived there. It was, it's a wonderful city. I think in collabs, you have to kind of think about it as a non-mathematical formula where 1 + 1 = 3, right? So you have to take two brands that have their own kind of unique, distinctive DNA and bring them together. And in some cases, you can bring quite extreme elements together. And in other cases, you bring things that are a little bit closer to home. Like we did a Buck Mason collab recently, which is this really beautiful product and extremely elevated design in the same kind of genre of what I'm wearing now.
Okay.
And it, for me, given where Eddie Bauer is right now, when we do collabs, I want them to really draw on the depth of our archive, because we have products going back to the 1920s, that are as unique and interesting today as they were then.
And why is that important? Is it the romantic or nostalgic nature of that? It's because we remember the old days, or like, what's the strategy?
Eddie Bauer patented the first down jacket. So, I mean, there's just a lineage that going straight back to that era with the first, down jacket, and then, down in general, Eddie Bauer down jackets, parkas, sleeping bags were used on the first Everest, American Everest ascent, and then essentially to climb all of the great peaks after that. And so, coming back to a place that's really true is important. You can't fake that. You've got to go to an authentic point of origin when you're going to kind of reinterpret the brand for the future.
I see. So you're going back to the archives to remind people, refresh about the authenticity, about the legitimate nature of the product line, that it was birthed from those early benchmarks. And I see. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. One of the other interesting stories, right? I'm wearing this silhouette that has like a ribbed, like bomber collar. It literally was made for the Air Force, right? And so, Eddie Bauer had it kind of engineered down garments, and in World War II outfitted the U.S. Air Force. And, the planes were not heated. They were really cold. Mm-hmm. And we have a whole collection of products that were uniquely designed for pilots to be worn. And you can take a small element like a collar and say, this is literally a functional component of the original garment that now we can reintroduce, in a new silhouette.
Yeah. Can I go back to North Face for a second?
Sure.
So I don't know if this was under your tenure there or you remember this story, but I remember, it feels like a year or two ago, there was this viral moment of this influencer girl out in the middle, maybe it was New Zealand.
Uh-huh.
You know what I'm talking about?
I do.
Yeah. And she was crying at the fact that she bought this expensive North Face jacket and it was supposed to be waterproof and it was not waterproof. And then obviously there was this very staged PR stunt that happened afterwards where a helicopter flew in a new jacket and dropped it off, a whole stunt. Were you privy to that?
That was just after I left.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, the internet sort of weighed in on that, and that was sort of fun, but also not super authentic, right? And so there's a lot of criticism about that stunt. I mean, it was fun as a marketer. I love to see that kind of stuff or that kind of effort or production happen. But at the same time, it was not authentic per se. Not as authentic as some of the other like CEO reactions or brand reactions to other things. Though the other one that came to mind was the Stanley Cup. Do you remember the Stanley?
Sure.
Where if you didn't see that, a woman's car somehow caught on fire and then she had a Stanley Cup in there that was full of some sort of beverage with ice.
Right.
The entire car melted to oblivion except the Stanley Cup was still intact and still had, I guess, the liquid, and it was still kind of cool. Yeah. Anyway, they bought her a new car and they gave her a new Stanley Cup.
Yeah, that was a cool moment.
Super authentic. So
yeah.
Sort of along those lines, and we've been talking about collaborations. Like, so how do you see integrating with other influencers, or like, what's your take? What's your approach as, the Eddie Bauer brand? Like, how do you approach things? Would you do a North Face style, Hollywood production where it's obviously this staged helicopter flies out, big PR stunt moment, or would you be more like the Stanley Cup CEO? Like, what is your take on that? How would you handle? Or how are you thinking about collaborations? Or
yeah, one of the really simple, people are starting to call them Timisms, right? Is that when you do things that are on brand, you tend to be successful and make money. When you do things that are off brand, you tend to not, right? When you're, and I can just see this over and over again. Managing different businesses at different parts of their life cycle and business cycle, but when you do things that are on brand, it's easy, and when you do things that are off brand, it's hard. And so, for me, it's always just a matter of making sure that you're coming from an authentic place of origin in the brand, and then making the decisions that continue to reinforce that.
What are some of how are you evaluating that, whether it's on brand or off brand? Like,
right.
Do you have like a, style guide, a Bible, certain rules?
We do. You sit down as you kind of do this kind of a brand, either rebranding exercise or a repositioning exercise. And you use, language and imagery to kind of define how you think about what the brand means and how you want to show up in the market.
Right.
And then, you really need to hold people to that, because as soon as, you're an every person brand and you start, dabbling in the hero, you're now, working almost at cross purposes with your intention. Right. And so we just try to keep it simple. Like
so that was on brand for North Face.
I think so.
Hero.
It's a hero brand, and they did a very heroic thing. And let me tell you this is not how anybody just so we're clear, I've described this to you as my interpretation of Patagonia and North Face. I don't actually think people inside those businesses think about them that way, per se. Right? Okay. Like this is like an overlay framework that I've created, a mental model I've created for the market and for the brands overall. But you will find over and over again when Patagonia is on brand with being a sage, it works. When the North Face is on brand with being a hero, it works. Yeah. When Eddie Bauer is on brand with being kind of an every person brand, it works.
Yeah. Back to Patagonia for a second. I remember it wasn't Yvonne that basically put a stake in the ground. It says, we're not working on one of the busiest holidays of the year.
Yeah.
What
it's Black Friday.
Yeah, it was Black Friday. They said, we're not, we're going to be out on our surfboards or climbing mountains or.
Yeah. Like we're taking the day off.
Yeah. Another great lesson of, I guess, walking the talk, living your brand. Yeah,
for sure. There is a strong anti-consumerism bent at Patagonia that's just part of its core as a business. So that's where that came from.
So how do you think about risk? I mean, I love the way you just framed the parameters that you created for yourself to stay on brand. Mm-hmm. You sort of, if you climb outside the fence and if you start to try to become the hero, it's off brand, or the sage, you're off brand, or whatever, you're off brand. Mm-hmm. But how do you take risks within the gates that you've created? Do you know, because you might be competing with other brands that say we're the every man's brand or every woman's brand.
Right.
How do you innovate or differentiate when you're competing with similar people with a similar mission or brand?
Yeah. Well, I mean, the first and most foundational way is through great product. And that's another place where when you do things that are on brand, you win. And if you're not on brand, you don't. And so, managing a product portfolio is in some ways managing risk, because you're going to take lots of time, energy, and resources from the company to develop something. And then you're going to take a lot of money to go buy it and put it in the market. And then you're going to live with the results of that. Right. And so, some of the biggest, risks that you take, as you will, are way upstream in deciding what you're going to make and then deciding how far you push on that thing as you go into the market.
Have you simplified the line at all? I'm just
a lot.
So I sat down with Will Ahmed, who made this brand. This is the brand. And I asked him about, why doesn't it tell time? Why doesn't it have a face or a light up screen? Or why doesn't it count my steps? He's like, it's a trap. As soon as you start acting like some of these other people with other features and benefits,
right,
all of a sudden, so you can sort of define who you are by simplifying, by subtraction.
That's right.
Not by addition.
That's right.
And so have you gone through that process as well? Like, what's the product? Are there 100 SKUs? Are there 1,000 SKUs? Like, have you simplified? Like, what does that look like?
Curating the product line is just a constant process of refinement.
Yeah. And I ask that with context because I know other people might have, maybe they have a flower shop and they're thinking about carrying every flower on the planet, or they have, they're making candy.
Yeah.
Should I do chocolate? And, so it's like, how do you subtract in order to sort of add to the bottom line?
People are overwhelmed with too much choice. I mean, it is, and one of the things I did find as I came into the business is there was too much choice.
Yeah.
Too much undifferentiated product, too many products overall.
Yeah.
And so as we look at 2025 compared to when I came in 2023, the line will be like half as big.
Yeah.
It'll be reduced by 50%.
My sense is that you are doing a significant amount of refinement.
Yeah, just reshaping the product portfolio.
Yeah.
It's also the case, the Pareto's law, right? Like the 80-20 rule. It applies to businesses like this where 80% of your revenue comes from 20% of your product. And candidly, when I walked in, I was like, we're doing 90% of our revenue with 10% of our product. And so what that means is you're going to be spreading your resources across a much bigger set of objectives than you need to.
Yeah. And what is the number one? What is the top seller?
The number one product in the company is called the Guide Pant. And it's a synthetic stretch woven hiking and mountaineering pant.
Okay. Wow. Yeah. Who knew?
Yeah. Who knew?
No.
Eddie Bauer, sells more sportswear than it does outerwear, which is the opposite of, say, a Patagonia or North Face that sell more outerwear than sportswear. And our pants are amazing.
Yeah.
You should try them because the fit is dialed. The textiles are amazing. And it's a unique thing because essentially this business, it's been a direct-to-consumer business its whole life, right?
Yeah, it was going to be my next question. Is it?
We're starting in a wholesale business, but being in the mall as the basis where people shop for sportswear predominantly, the business has essentially got an incredible sportswear offering, and the fit integrity is best in class. And so,
yeah, I mean, apparently enough people know that is 90% of your business, but I didn't know.
Yeah,
That's cool.
and the guide pant is not 90% of our business, but it's our best-selling product, and about 90% of our revenue is coming from about 10% of the products.
Yeah, I mean, what else sells well?
Well, we have, we could go through every category has a kind of has a hero, right? T-shirts are a great business, fleece, and then we have down and down outerwear and rainwear.
Okay, so it's kind of intuitive what you might think, except for the pants.
Yeah, the general silhouettes, but with just a huge distorted strength in sportswear pants overall for men and for women.
Awesome.
Yeah.
And then talk to me about the D2C versus, so you have brick and mortar,
right,
and you have online.
Right.
Is that pretty evenly split? How does that work?
Yeah, it's uniquely evenly split. It's almost 50-50 between our online business and our stores business.
How many stores do you have now?
About 250.
Okay. And are you thinking about consolidating that as well? Or
yeah,
because malls are sort of not being attended very well anymore.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at the data, especially coming out of COVID, mall traffic is up. But it's not, the United States in aggregate has a lot of retail, especially if you compare it to any other country in the world.
Yeah.
And so there's an opportunity for efficiency in how you curate the stores.
Well, I bet you're getting a better rental rate now because, maybe the consensus, at least my opinion, is I'm going less to the mall and I'm shopping more online. That's just me.
Yeah. Rents are kind of a unidirectional thing. They kind of go up and to the right. Okay. Just as a general rule. But one of the amazing things about the last era in the business, as digital, as you were mentioning, the birth of the internet happened over the last, call it 20 years, is that Eddie Bauer was a cataloger and it became a digital retailer during that period. And so, half of our business is online. And so, I spend a disproportionate amount of time on our digital business just because of the size it is for revenue overall.
And is there still catalog going? So
No, it's just stores and a digital business with kind of an emergent wholesale business and international business.
Another brand I've lost track of is LL Bean. Are they still doing catalog business? Because they were the catalog. I believe
LL Bean does have a catalog still. Yeah.
And you guys, for whatever reason, got rid of it. It was not efficient, or was it working, or you just, the online sales were, adoption levels were where they needed to be and just sort of take care of itself?
Sure. Everything's become digitized, right?
Yeah.
And so it's just very reasonable that the business has moved online. And mobile traffic is obviously the number one way people visit our site, and people are just on their smartphone. And it was an art to maintain a catalog business, and it was shut. The catalog sort of stopped being published before I arrived, so I didn't have to kind of that would have been a very difficult call to have to make. Like, hey, we've been a cataloger for our whole lives. Right. Now we're not going to make a catalog. We're just going to be digital.
Right.
So candidly, I'm glad I didn't have to make that call. Let somebody else make it. But the net result is that the business is now half stores, half digital.
Mm-hmm. What does the marketing mix look like? So where are you spending?
We spend almost all of our money in digital.
Okay.
Yeah.
And is it like with Meta? Are you spending on Instagram to find? Everyone's probably on Instagram these days, but.
Yeah. The algorithms devour as many dollars. It's like showing up to the arcade with your kids. Like, you're going to leave with a lot less quarters than you came in with, as the algorithm just sort of sorts that out. So yeah, we spend most of our marketing dollars in social, and email is a huge part of our business. Just a direct relationship with the consumer.
Okay. And what do you learn from email? Are you getting customer feedback, or are you getting? Are you handling it are you doing questionnaires at all either, or is it just point of contact?
Point of contact. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. We do consumer insights intermittently, based on usually on a project basis. If we want to know more about, a pricing strategy or a product strategy.
How do the pants fit?
Yes. Yeah. All those sorts of things.
Like the pants.
Yeah.
How about activations?
It's been quiet in terms of activations lately, just coming out of COVID and focusing on the existing malls and digital business.
Yeah. What if we were just to sort of dream? What is like a fantasy collaboration or activation, or what's sort of out there that's not committed but like you're thinking about? That would be cool.
Yeah. I don't have anything that just leaps to mind. We are so enmeshed right now in getting the wholesale business stood up and the international business stood up that we're candidly not focusing on that right now.
Yeah. I'm thinking out loud here. Maybe it's something at Yosemite National Park. Maybe it's like, all of the recycle cans are like, sponsored by Eddie Bauer, or maybe there's like this some sort of activation in the park, or there's tours, or
I'll head home today and my head of marketing be like, Tim, you totally blew that. We were doing this and this and this and this and this, and that is probably part of my own blind spot, if you will, on the day to day inside the marketing department, because I'm sure our head of marketing is going to have a few words for me after this.
No, I like to dream. I'm sort of the idea guy, and I'll just throw kind of spaghetti noodles against the wall and see what sticks. But I love activations, I think, because you get so much out of it, right? You get to see, it's like showing your movie in a theater, and like the director's in there with the crowd, and watching the facial expressions, the happy, the sad, watching the emotions. You get to do that with activations too, right?
Oh yeah. Well, now that you say that, we do have one thing happening this fall. As we're rebranding this fall, so the first of our new products will come out, and in conjunction with that, I asked the design team right when I got here. I said, "Listen, I'd like to be able to close my eyes and see an Eddie Bauer product in my mind. Can you tell me which product that is?" And they were like, "We haven't really thought about it that way." And I said, "Well, would you mind thinking about it that way?"
Yeah.
Like, I'd like to really know, when we all collectively close our eyes and imagine what Eddie Bauer is, what that looks like to you.
Yeah.
And so they came back with an idea, and we're launching that this fall, and we'll do that through an activation in New York with media and influencers.
Can you give us a sneak peek, a hint? Can you?
Yeah, I mean, it is rooted in a lot of the stuff I talked about earlier, and down, kind of originated from the early era, the 1940s era, and the brand.
Very cool.
But kind of reimagined in a contemporary silhouette.
So another question on rebranding. So what was rebranded? Is it just like, all right, we're going to go back to the basics, we're going to come back with a new look? Was there like the logo, was the color, did the color change? Like what actually went into that rebrand?
Yeah. Well, when I was being interviewed for the job, I went to Walk Retail, and they said, "Hey, what do you think of this?" And I said, "Well, the product looks good. The brand itself could probably use an update.
It's dated.
Have you thought about it?" And they said, "Yeah, we've thought about it." I said, "Okay, yeah. Are you open to changing?" "Yeah, we're open to changing." "Okay, good." Because I think that would be being open, that openness is important. And listen, you can't take rebranding lightly, especially in your 100-year-old company, right? And literally the signature, the founder is the logo, right? So it's like, take a deep breath and think about this for a little bit.
Oh, wait. Eddie Bauer's signature is the logo?
Yes.
Okay, I didn't even know that.
Yeah. And so
it is sort of scripty and...
yeah, it's cursive.
Cursive-y.
Yeah, it's cursive. And so, a former colleague who went on to be the vice president of creative at Coke and do the Coke rebrand, went out on his own to create an agency. And I gave him a call and said, "Would you be interested in working with us on this rebranding?" And he's done work at Levi's and the North Face and other great brands.
Yeah.
And so, it was a really great collaboration with a super talented designer. And we ran the process, right? And so we just kind of started with what we have today and, took the script, considered retaining the script and adding to it, in order to just, refresh it and bring it back to life. And then we went through an entire exploration around, from closer to home to pretty far out there to try to figure out what's the right place to be. The problems we were really solving for, and, you could beat up in the comments for saying things like this, but the script itself is not particularly legible, right? Sure. It's not easy to read. It's extremely long when you put it on a product. So if you want to have, it's a long word and it's, a compound word, it's the name linked together.
Right.
And then, if you think through the lens of the next generation, and this is where people in the comments will get all upset, but they don't learn cursive. Like my kids are not learning to read cursive.
Good point.
And so you go, well,
read it.
What do you think? I mean, granted, Coke is in cursive and, all of the sorts of things, but what does the modern version of this logo look like? And so we went through that process, and we built a completely custom typeface for the brand in the new logo, and brought the goose, which has been part of the Eddie Bauer brand from its origin. We brought it back, we brushed it up, we modernized it. It's really important that a brand have a name and an icon, right? And the brand, the name was the icon, and that's sometimes hard, right? When the name is the icon, you kind of want a swoosh, you kind of want an apple.
Ralph Lauren has his pony.
You want a pony. You want something simple and identifiable. And so we said, hey, listen, like the goose has been here all along. We went through an elaborative process around figuring out exactly this kind of custom kind of form for the typeface itself. and it'll launch in July.
Exciting.
Yeah, on product. It's on our website now. So if you go to the website, you can see it. It's up. All the digital channels have been flipped. And then product will start to ship in July, and then stores are either redeveloped or refurbished, all the new signage goes into play.
Yeah. Maybe one last question here regarding brand and logo, but it's like, so Eddie Bauer has been traditionally logo-less. I mean, there's maybe on a buckle or a brace. I see something on the side of your pocket here that looks like what would you call that?
That's actually the collab jound.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I see little marks here, but it's conspicuously absent.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's also by design?
Yeah. The brand mark is kind of light touch, but when you're an outerwear brand, outerwear tends to carry a little heavier branding. So if you were to, canvas our product offering, you'd find more outspoken branding on outerwear, particularly technical outerwear, mountaineering and climbing and skiing outerwear, and then a much more quiet perspective when it comes to sportswear.
Yeah. Maybe final question is, what are in 18 months, what are some of the things that have gone wrong that you've been able to course correct, figure out, and kind of set yourself on the right path?
Yeah. Well, I always say that my team will kind of laugh at this one, but managing these businesses is just a constant series of error correction.
Mm-hmm.
And, when you're young and you're working on these businesses, you're like thinking about logging the things you got right. And now I'm like, that's important too, but it's just as important to log the things that you did wrong and do less and less and less of those as you go forward,
right.
And so I'll tell you, and I say this to a lot of our younger staff, but I sort of like, congratulations, you're getting to grow up in the most gnarly retail environment of a generation. Mm-hmm. The COVID era, during COVID, we had limited amount of goods and an unlimited amount of money. Demand went through the roof for everybody simultaneously. And then as we've come through the COVID era and reopening, things are kind of normalizing, if you will. You could say, the market is going to mean revert over time, and having to kind of adjust to the fact that consumers have less money to spend on consumer goods right now because the inflation that's happened in the rest of their lives, mm-hmm. right? And so, I'd say that some of the biggest challenges right now are just managing that whipsaw activity that's happening in the market in real time, getting your inventories right, keeping them in check given your demand picture. The way that apparel businesses hurt themselves is by making too much product, right? And so you just have to always be super diligent on that. And we've got a really smart team who manage that for us, but that is the demand picture is as hard to read now as I've ever seen.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a whole competitive landscape in your mind? Like, who's in our league and who we're competing against? I mean, ultimately we're competing against ourselves.
Right.
But how do you look at competition?
Yeah. One of the things I saw early in my career observing executives coming in from outside of a company is that they take the playbook from the old shop and they apply it at the new shop. And I've been very clear to not do that. So we're not going to try to compete against Patagonia. There's no way to out Patagonia.
Right.
We're not going to try to out compete the North Face at its core kind of way of operating. And we'll kind of take this very kind of true to Eddie Bauer path. And there are brands that sit in that space, that kind of every person brand on every continent. There is some homegrown version of an every person brand in every country in Europe and the United States, in Canada, mm-hmm. and to some degree in Japan. But most of the Japan outdoor brands are brought in from around the world.
Yeah, the one that I can think of offhand from Japan is Uniqlo.
Yeah, and you might not think of them. You might think of them more as a fast fashion retailer than as an outdoor brand, but they certainly made a lot of puffy coats.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's almost like they're looking at what's working at other brands and cherry picking and maybe implementing that into their line.
I think that's 100% what they do. Yeah.
So it's very opportunistic, but it's like you won't maybe see that same thing unless it keeps selling well at other places.
Yeah. There are times in kind of fast fashion where kind of outdoor products do really well, and then it's very cyclical, right? You know, there's a time where fleece and flannel and down is like the thing, and then that fades away. Tends to be a core business for us forever because it's just like the core identity of the brand. But at Uniqlo or what other fast fashion brand, that'll be a 24-month cycle and then it's over.
I mean, you're a new CEO.
Yeah.
Do you feel like fires to the feet at all, like to sort of right the ship, get it going in the right direction? Or it's like you've got the wind in your sails and everything's going your way? It's like, how are you feeling now 18 months in?
Yeah. You know, it was probably only, I don't know how many years ago I started to think, well, maybe I'll be a CEO one day. But it's a relatively recent rather than old thought, to be honest. And I remember, 10 years ago, still going like, well, I think I could do that. Maybe I should think about that in the future. And at the time, this is back when we still read magazines, right? You would read the Harvard Business Review. And I remember reading an article that had said, what are the qualities that make a successful CEO? And I was like, I'm really interested to understand this. Like, could I be a CEO in the future? Like, I'm going to read the Harvard Business Review. It'll tell me, I'll define whether or not this is going to be possible.
Yeah.
And in that study that they'd conducted, what they determined was, listen, CEOs come in kind of all shapes and sizes with all different types of personalities and backgrounds. You might have somebody as a finance person or an operations person or a product person or a marketing person or a sales leader, right? I mean, anytime you look at a corporation and you look at who's in the CEO role, that person is a manifestation of what whoever owns that business or the board think the company needs at that time, right? And so you can almost like do a one-to-one relationship between like who's the CEO, what's their background. That should be an expression of what the company needs right now.
Right.
And I remember reading this article and going, they couldn't draw any conclusions across, any of the normal demographics of what makes a great CEO. It wasn't necessarily educational background. It wasn't necessarily intelligence. It wasn't necessarily what function they grew up in, in the business. The thing that they found to be true across all cases were the people who were in the CEO job were the people who were willing to put in the most hours. And that's when I knew, I was like, okay, I have a chance. Because if you're willing to do the work, there's an opportunity, right? And I would say it's all consuming, right? I mean, I think you asked earlier, like, what advice would you give to a CEO? And I don't have any generic advice for CEOs because I think everybody's situation is really specific. But having your sleep wired, having your exercise program wired, having your food wired.
Are you still reading philosophy? Are you still tapping into the outdoors for your inspiration?
Oh, yeah.
Are you talking, do you have a peer group? Like, do you have some, other C-suite people that you can confide in to say, what should I do, people?
Yeah.
This is a head scratcher.
Yeah. And I think getting your food, your sleep, your exercise right. The other thing is your relationships right. And for me, the foundation of those relationships is my wife. And the other thing I just sort of like suggest generically is have an awesome foundational relationship in your life because
your partner really matters.
It matters a lot.
Yeah.
Because if you're burning fuel on that because it's not working, you're not able to do this, right? And so, we got a camper van. We camp. I jokingly say for my sons that it's like the Army Reserves or whatever. They have to do 1 weekend a month and 2 weeks a year camping. And so, when they write essays at school, like about their summer or what defines them, camping always comes up. And my wife and I have just said, like, when our kids grow up, we want them to remember camping with us. That's what we want them to remember. So we take anytime we can to go do that sort of thing. Like we spent spring break on the Pacific Coast, which, by the way, is way too cold in Washington in spring break to do that sort of thing. Yeah, but tide pooling. Right. And we just take the boys out and spend as much time in nature with them as we possibly can. And that's kind of a through line for us through our entire life as a family.
I mean, we were just sitting back, chopping it up, reminiscing about the good old days and all that, tracking my roots, where I came from and where I'm going. like I say, man,